The final session of our conference focuses on organizations that educate the public about the First Amendment. Our moderator is Lana Ulrich. Joining her are Lata Nott and Katy Glenn Bass. Would you please come to the stage? Lana Ulrich is in-house counsel at the National Constitution Center, where she assists in managing the center's constitutional content and programming, including podcasts, exhibits, town hall debates, the Interactive Constitution, Constitution Daily blog, and curriculum. She also assists with any legal matters relating to the center's operations and directs the continuing legal education program. Prior to joining the center, she worked as a legal fellow for another nonprofit organization in Philadelphia. She holds a BA with honors from Pennsylvania State University and a JD with honors from the George Washington University Law School. Lata Nott is executive director of the Freedom Forum Institute's First Amendment Center. She previously served as assistant director of admissions at Georgetown University Law Center, focusing on diversity, high-need students, and recruitment technology, and was formerly a New York City litigator where she developed expertise in legal issues concerning the cyber world. Katy Glenn Bass is research director of the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University. She was previously the director of PEN America's Free Expression Research and Policy Program. Ms. Bass taught at New York University's Law Center for Constitutional Transitions and Fordham Law School's International Human Rights Clinic.
Well, thank you so much. I'm Lana Ulrich. I'm with the National Constitution Center, and I'm here filling in for Jeff. And I want to tell you a little bit about our institution and some of our programs and resources that you can visit after this great conference is over to learn more about the First Amendment. Before I tell you a little bit about our online and digital resources, I want to tell you about the museum itself. We are the only institution in America chartered by Congress to disseminate information about the U.S. Constitution on a nonpartisan basis. We are a museum and an educational center located in Philadelphia, right across from Independence Hall and the Liberty Bell. So if you're ever in Philadelphia, please come and visit. We have a number of excellent exhibits on site. Our main exhibit is The Story of We the People, which tells the story of the Constitution from the Constitutional Convention all the way up through the modern day. We have an exhibit featuring the founding documents, so handwritten drafts by James Wilson from the Committee of Detail that reflect the evolution of the Constitution over time, as well as a new exhibit we're currently developing about the Reconstruction Amendments. It'll be the first exhibit focused on the constitutional story of Reconstruction and the story of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. In addition, we have a number of great town hall programs on site where we bring leading journalists, scholars, historians together to debate constitutional issues, much like the conference that we are at today. We also have a number of podcasts that we put out, We the People and Live at America's Town Hall. So if you have Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, please feel free to subscribe and to get a weekly dose of constitutional debate right on your iPhone. As Jeff mentioned, our leading online resource, if you go to our website, you can click on Explore the Constitution, and let me try and see if this will work. Great, so if you go to our website, which is constitutioncenter.org, click on Read the Constitution, you'll get to the Interactive Constitution landing page. And as Jeff mentioned, this is our flagship online educational tool, which we're hoping to push out to AP students through the College Board and other students as well. But obviously the general public, we hope will use this as a great, I think of it as the nonpartisan Wikipedia about the Constitution. So if you ever have a question about a constitutional issue, you want to get both sides of it, you can go to this tool and you can read about the provisions. So let's click Explore It. See if this works. Okay, great. So you'll see here we have all of the amendments, and if you click on articles, we also have most of the structural constitution as well. But since we're at a First Amendment conference, let's click on the First Amendment. And you can see here we have the various clauses of the First Amendment, the Establishment Clause, free exercise, freedom of speech and press, which we've combined, and freedom of assembly and petition. And the great thing about this project, which was funded by the Templeton Foundation but sponsored by the American Constitution Society and the Federalist Society, is that it brings together the leading scholars on every amendment and clause nominated by each respective institution to write an explainer about what they agree about the interpretation on the amendment and then what they disagree about. So if you want to click on, for instance, freedom of speech, you'll see here the explainer by Professor Jeff Stone and Professor Eugene Volokh. Now this is what we call the joint explainer, which is the overview of everything that they can agree about on these two clauses, which is often just the black letter law, essentially. And you'll see that they've explained the history of the interpretation of speech and press and some of the leading cases as well. And at the bottom, under matters of debate, you'll see the individual explainer by Professor Stone, and it's his interpretation of these clauses as well as the individual explainer by Professor Volokh. And so in about 1,000 words, you can get a great overview from both sides of the debate on not just the First Amendment, from the rest of the Constitution as well, but for our purposes here, speech and press in particular. And so our goal is to share this tool with as many people as we can, and as Jeff mentioned, specifically teach it in AP classes, but I think the idea is to eventually spread it to other students as well, 8th grade through high school and college and beyond. So we welcome your feedback and your ideas about ways in which to bring this tool to other classrooms, not just AP students as well. But my hope is that you'll visit our website. You can download the app. There's an Interactive Constitution app you can get. And please explore it and decide for yourself which interpretation you think is the most persuasive. And obviously, come visit us in Philadelphia as well. And you can see firsthand not just the exhibits that we have, but the actual copies of the founding documents themselves. So thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Lata Nott, and I am the Executive Director of the First Amendment Center of the Freedom Forum Institute. We're located in Washington, D.C., at the Newseum, actually, which is a museum dedicated to the free press. And we're a think tank that exists inside and alongside the Newseum. And essentially, our focus is all 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment. We see it as our mission to educate the public about how those freedoms work, how they might be at risk, and how they can be protected. And we are a nonpartisan organization. We're neutral. We don't litigate. We don't lobby, but we like to think of ourselves as a very aggressive Switzerland. When in doubt, we favor more freedom of expression over less freedom of expression. And what's kind of an interesting challenge about educating people about the First Amendment is that it's this, and this is something that has been discussed so much and in so much depth today, but when you think about the average person, people generally know of the First Amendment, and they know a little about it. They know that it gives them the right to express themselves, but they're kind of fuzzy on the specific details. Every year, we conduct a State of the First Amendment survey. Hey, that's our webpage, and as you can see, if you go to firstamendmentcenter.org, we've got a lot of great resources there, including the results of the surveys that we take every year. And we do it in order to get a feel for how much Americans know about the First Amendment, how they feel about it. The good news is that this year, 3 out of 4 people are very supportive of the rights that the First Amendment guarantees, which, I do wonder about the other 1 out of 4 that is not, but 3 out of 4, that's not bad. But then when we asked them if they could name all 5 freedoms guaranteed by the First Amendment, 40% could name one. 36% could not name any. Out of our entire sample of 1,009 people, I believe only one could name all 5. And this is the thing that really was like a dagger in my heart. 9% thought that the First Amendment guaranteed the right to bear arms. And that's, that's just hurtful, come on. And while having a gun can mean that you get to say what you want, it's not the same thing, come on guys. So that's the results just kind of show that people have a long way to go when it comes to like an extensive understanding of the First Amendment, but that sort of leads to the question, why does it matter if Americans don't know exactly what the First Amendment says? I mean, Americans don't know exactly what the Third Amendment has to say, I'm sure, and nobody's losing sleep over it. That's the one about not being able to force somebody to quarter British soldiers inside their homes. It doesn't come up a lot anymore. Well, I mean, one answer to that question is that the First Amendment comes up constantly, online, in our lives. It comes up in court, it comes up on campus. It's really interwoven into our lives in a way that I can't think of many other laws are. And the other thing is that any teacher will tell you that a little knowledge can sometimes be more dangerous than no knowledge at all. And the fact that Americans generally know that the First Amendment gives them the right to express themselves, but they don't know the particulars of it, that often leads people to think that the First Amendment protects their expression and their speech, but not the speech of people that they disagree with. And you know, part of that is probably just human nature, but the other part of that is that a lot of people just genuinely don't know what the limits on the First Amendment are. So when we created our educational resources, we focus on that. We focus on people who are curious, and some of them do have a background in law, some don't, but people who want to know more about specific issues. So on our website, we have articles on nearly every aspect of First Amendment law, and that's something for people who want to dig deep into the actual legal concepts. But we also have primers to get people up to speed on basic First Amendment issues. You know, we've got a great primer on how you can tell if your speech is protected by the First Amendment. We have one on how the law surrounding protest works and what kinds of restrictions the government can and can't place on the right to protest. And so we have things just to basically get a layperson acquainted with how the First Amendment works. On a nerdier vein, we have a podcast called The First Five, which I love because it allows us to delve into specific questions people have, like can your boss penalize you for having certain political points of view, or can a journalist publish illegally obtained information, things like that. And so we kind of take a multifaceted approach to exploring these issues and educating the public. And we also consider it part of our mission to keep abreast with how technology and free expression intersect, because that's happening a lot these days, and these are the issues that affect a lot of people. So for example, we wrote a lot about the controversy about whether 3D guns and printing guns was protected by the First Amendment. We write a lot about how social media and free expression intersect. Fake news is another issue that the center is very concerned with, because of course fake news is protected by the First Amendment, because lies are protected by the First Amendment. But on the other hand, if you look at it a little more closely, if you think about the freedom of the press existing so that the public could learn more about what's going on in the world, then fake news kind of undercuts that completely. And so it's sort of a hard line to balance stopping the spread of misinformation and also avoiding censorship or avoiding making yourself the arbiter of truth. So one of the ventures that we've done that I'm very excited about is that we just launched an app called Newseum, and it's a Chrome extension and a Mozilla extension, so if you would download it, I would be most grateful. But basically, when you're looking at your news feed, you can get, I hope, an obtrusive pop-up that tells you a little bit more about the stories that are in your feed. Like, it will give you some information about the media outlet that created the story. It will show you the other websites and articles and sources that the story relied upon and linked to. And if there's something out there that's debunking what that article has to say, you'll get a link to that too. So it's all just about providing you a little bit more information. We call it nutrition because I love puns, but also because, you know, if you think of a nutrition label, it's not a judgment on whether or not you should eat the Twinkie. It's just more information so that you can make your own decision, and that was kind of our impetus behind that. But yeah, it's a pretty exciting time, I think, especially because, as we've discussed, there's so many issues surrounding the First Amendment today, so there's a lot of work to be done. And I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Katy. Oh, thank you. I'm Katy Glenn Bass. I'm the research director at the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University. We are the new kid on the block as far as this panel is concerned. We were established only about 2 years ago with generous funding from the Knight Foundation and Columbia University, and our purpose is to defend free speech and press freedom in the digital age, which we do through 3 major approaches. The first is strategic litigation, the second is research, and the third is public education. So as I said, our mission focuses more on digital concerns, so things like the privatization of the public square as more and more speech moves online, the expansion of government surveillance, the collection of massive amounts of personal data by private corporations, the growth of government secrecy in terms of what gets classified and for how long, and questions about machine-amplified distortions of public discourse, meaning everything from bots that are trying to get certain things to trend on Twitter to the way algorithms work and decide what you see in your newsfeed and what you don't see. So that's where our focus primarily is. I'll talk briefly about each of our 3 major approaches. The first is strategic litigation. We're probably best known so far for having sued the president for blocking his critics on Twitter. Our argument is that the social media accounts of public officials are public forums, and that therefore government officials cannot block people from participating within that public forum. The district court agreed with us, which we were quite pleased about, and we'll see how the appellate court feels about it fairly soon. We also have other litigation ongoing, and we do a lot of FOIA work as well, Freedom of Information Act requests and associated litigation there. On the research side, we have a couple of different strands within our research program. One is scholarly research, where we ask First Amendment scholars to write pieces exploring new or emerging or evolving threats to the system of free expression, again with a focus on the digital age, although not exclusively there. So the series that we have currently on our site takes a look at topics ranging from whether or not the First Amendment is obsolete in an age where anyone can publish anything, and the question is really about getting people's attention to whatever it is you're trying to say, to looking at the concept of the hostile audience and First Amendment protections in the wake of Charlottesville, to how tech platforms can and should determine who constitutes a public figure online. So things like that, and then we also have responses from other scholars to those concepts. So the point of that is they're written for a general audience, but a general audience that probably has some familiarity with the First Amendment already. And our goal is to really drive forward our thinking about the First Amendment and maybe advance new ideas of how the First Amendment can and should apply to some of the questions that we're grappling with right now. We also hold a number of public events, which are a portion of our public education efforts. A couple of recent examples. We have had a series of events on the First Amendment and mass surveillance. So the first of the panels that we organized had to do with First Amendment theories and how they might apply to mass surveillance, how we might bring challenges to mass surveillance practices on First Amendment grounds, not necessarily simply on Fourth Amendment grounds the way they are often brought in court. And the next panel in that series will look at social science research. How do we measure things like the chilling effect? One of the main reasons we worry about mass surveillance from a First Amendment perspective is the idea that it's going to chill people's speech. So how do we measure that? What do we know about research approaches that might help us do that? And then finally, we're going to do one looking at private companies and their role in surveillance, both in terms of the data collection that they do and in terms of their cooperation at times with the government. We also held an event at Georgetown in partnership with their First Amendment Center called Secrets and Leaks, which focused on journalists, whistleblowers, and national security, which is a topic that's come up here today as well. And we had about 600 people in attendance for that. So all 3 of those strands of our work really work together, and they all have a public education component to them in some sense, in that when our lawyers are describing the litigation efforts that we're going through, we are also trying to explain why these cases matter from a larger question of government transparency or accountability or public discourse, and not just the particular legal theories that we're pursuing in court. And similarly with our research. I'll say, just to build on what Lata and Lana have said, a couple of observations from the work we've done on sort of public education efforts and in work that I've done in the past. I'd say there's an enormous appetite for conversations like this right now. I mean, the turnout at this conference is one example of it, but I think people are really eager and hungry to participate in conversations about this and in thinking through what values related to free speech and press freedom are going to mean in our current era and how we can best defend them. So that's something encouraging for me, even in a time when there seem to be a lot of dark forces around free expression. Another thing that I've noticed similarly to that is that when you are trying to draw people into the conversation, or when you are making some sort of effort at education or just discourse more generally, it often helps to appeal to the values underlying the First Amendment, not necessarily just the First Amendment as it's currently interpreted in our courts. So trying to get people to think about, why do these values matter to our society? What work do we think they're doing in our democracy? Why do we think they're important? Why do we think a healthy public discourse is important to begin with? That can often help people find common ground. Common ground, which has been a theme today. It's just bringing everyone back to that sort of central question of values. And finally, I would just say that one thing I always think about when we're designing these programs or our research or anything like that is I really try to find a way to connect whatever program or topic we're discussing to things that people can actually do. This is not just a conversation about things that are happening to us. It's a conversation about things that, as participants in this democracy, we have a role to play in either furthering or stopping, trying to give people specific actions that they can take related to a given problem. If you're worried about the free press, subscribe to some newspapers. It's a first step, it's a small first step, but it's something that you can do. Talk to your representatives, tell them you want them to be focused on these issues as well. So that's something that's always in the back of my mind when I'm thinking through these programs and how we can expand them and build support for these values, is also making sure people realize that they are active participants in how these situations develop as well. Thank you.
So since this panel has no moderator,
Yeah, I'm not supposed to be mine.
yeah, I was asked just to say a couple of sentences to wrap things up. And I think you can tell that all of our organizations focus on educating the public about the First Amendment, but there's just so many different approaches, whether it's the close read of the Constitution and the law surrounding that, or the focus on strategic litigation, and also just the myriad of very frightening digital age issues that affect free expression, or my own organization's focus on sort of filling that gap where people are sort of aware of the First Amendment but don't really know how it works. I think that, I mean, all of these are very necessary. One, because the First Amendment is such a multifaceted issue and piece of law, really. And the other, just because there's so many aspects to it. There's so much that people want to know that they don't know, and there's so many things that people want to do, as you said, like concrete actions that people want to take right now. And I'm glad that we can all be in this space and hopefully do our part to make sure expression continues.
All right.
As we close, I'd like to thank the many individuals, and notice that we're ahead of time. I just want to point that out. But the many individuals who contributed to making this conference so special, way beyond even our highest expectations. From the Duquesne University community, I first want to give our special thanks to Professor Erin Karsman. Technically, her title is Director of Appellate Advocacy Programs. She coaches the appellate moot court teams and also teaches. She's been shy about getting recognition, but she has literally been juggling 100 things to make this conference come together properly, and it has worked magnificently. So, Erin, please come up and take a bow up here. Okay, and you can stay here. So I told her I wanted her to get used to standing here and receiving praise for her work. So I also want to thank Ron Gelati, who's working behind the scenes back there. Ron, stand up. Our Assistant VP for Conference and Event Services, Leah Morrison. Is Leah still around here? Leah has done great work in terms of branding and marketing. Kyle Payne, Associate Director of Technical Services, who's done coordinating a lot of the filming and everything. Devin Ferris, I think Devin is outside, Assistant Conference Coordinator, and Sam Nolan, a third-year law student who's helped out as well. I've mentioned a couple times that over the course of really 2 years, we've been really fortunate to work in partnership with Max King and the Pittsburgh Foundation, our co-hosts, co-sponsors. This program, folks, never would have happened without the passion, vision, and relentless cajoling of Max King at the Pittsburgh Foundation, who is a true gem for us in this Pittsburgh region as a thought leader, as a philanthropist. And so he didn't want to, but I'm making him come up on stage too, so that we can thank Max for all that he's done. So appreciate that, Max. And also our thanks to the rest of the Pittsburgh Foundation team, Emmy Callan, Senior Manager for the Center for Philanthropy and Strategic Initiatives. Is Emmy back there? Where's Emmy? Stand up, Emmy, come on. Doug Root, Vice President for Communication. Doug's still here? Okay, there he is, hiding back there. Kitty Julian, Senior Communications Officer. Kitty, still here? And last but not least, Jean Perlman. Is Jean here? She has been really a key force in building the series, 2 programs, the first at the Heinz Endowments. My thanks as well to Andy Conti, Founding Director of the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University, who handled a really good and, kind of controversial but worth hearing conversation about new forms of free speech that are on the edge, and he has worked with us since the beginning of planning this program. We're also indebted to Matt Grohl of the Allegheny Foundation, Bill Benter and the Benter Foundation, and the folks at the Knight Foundation for all of their support and generosity. I really want to thank all of the incredible panelists. I've been doing big events for many years, and it's really hard once you get this many moving parts to make them all move correctly. And these panelists have just been fabulous and have made it possible. And so finally, I want to say that the reward, you are the chosen who have stuck it through, so you get cookies and coffee in the Shepperson Suite. But I really want to thank you for being here. It's been a wonderful audience. It's inspirational to people when they come. So many people said that just looking out and seeing this incredible audience here makes them passionate and realize that it is worth going around the country and having these conversations. So I hope that at least in some way each of you has rediscovered perhaps the irreplaceable role that the First Amendment plays in our American democracy. Thank you for being part of this very special event. And as the last panel suggested, I really hope and we plan to build upon the fruits of this conference to educate a new generation of young men and women and citizens for a new era. Thank you all very much.